Have you ever stopped to wonder who's really calling the shots behind the scenes of U.S. decisions? We're told it's democracy, that the people have the power, that every vote counts, and every leader acts in the interest of the citizens. But what if I told you that's only part of the story? What if the real decisions, the ones that shape wars, shift economies, and decide who gets sanctioned and who gets support, aren't made in the White House, but somewhere far quieter and far more connected? This isn't about conspiracies. This is about influence, strategic alliances, silent agreements, and at the center of it all, Israel, a nation the U.S. swore to protect, a partner that gets billions in aid while Americans debate health care, a friend or a force. You see, when the U.S. moves against Iran, when sanctions hit hard, or when missiles fly over the Middle East, it's never random. There's always a motive. And often that motive traces back to protecting not just American interests, but Israeli security, Israeli strategy, Israeli priorities. Some call it partnership, others manipulation. This isn't the stuff you hear on cable news. This is the truth buried under headlines. The kind of truth that makes people uncomfortable because it shakes what they thought they knew. But if you're here watching this, you're not afraid of discomfort. You're looking for answers. So stay with me, because once we peel back the surface, once we start connecting the dots, you'll see how deep this really goes. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The unshakable bond that was never accidental. When Israel was declared a state in 1948, the world was still recovering from the wreckage of World War II. Millions of Jews had been slaughtered in the Holocaust, and the international community was under immense pressure to offer them a homeland. But it wasn't just sympathy that shaped what came next. It was strategy. It was power. It was long-term influence. Within just 11 minutes of Israel's declaration of independence, the United States became the first country to officially recognize the new state. That wasn't just fast, that was historic. And it wasn't just a gesture of goodwill, it was a statement, a signal to the world that this small newborn nation had the backing of the world's most powerful player. Why so fast? Why so public? Because the alliance between Israel and the United States wasn't born from just friendship, it was built from calculation. The Middle East is one of the most resource rich and geopolitically sensitive regions on Earth. After World War II, the U.S. was eyeing the region not just for oil, but for control. Establishing a strong ally, one that could serve as a strategic outpost, a listening post, and a military partner was too important to leave to chance. But there was another layer to it all. A deep emotional and religious connection that many in America, especially within Christian communities, felt toward Israel. This wasn't just politics. It was prophecy. The return of the Jewish people to their land was seen by many as a fulfillment of biblical promises. And for certain powerful political figures and voter blocs, supporting Israel wasn't just good policy, it was a divine mission. So while the politicians shook hands and the world celebrated, a deeper bond was forming, one stitched together by religion, wrapped in guilt from the Holocaust, and reinforced by military and financial incentives. Over the decades, that bond only grew stronger. Israel quickly became the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid, not just once or twice, but consistently year after year. Billions of dollars sent overseas in weapons, technology, and economic support. Why? Because Israel wasn't just a friend, it was an extension of U.S. power in a region that never stopped burning with tension. But with all that funding came leverage, and with leverage came expectations. When the U.S. entered wars, pulled out of treaties, sanctioned nations, or shifted its Middle East policy, the fingerprints of Israeli interests weren't far behind. This wasn't a one-sided friendship. This was a partnership of power. And let's be honest, friendships don't come with billion-dollar military packages and intelligence coordination. Influence does. Strategic interest does. From the very beginning, this relationship was forged not in brotherhood but in benefit. The emotional and religious narratives made it easier to sell to the public. But behind closed doors, it was always about control, about making sure the U.S. had a strong, dependable presence in the Middle East, about making sure Israel had the backing to defend itself and to never act alone, even when it did. And as we dig deeper into this alliance, especially in the context of Iran, it becomes clear what started as a moment of support in 1948 evolved into one of the most complex, influential relationships in modern geopolitics. Not by accident, not by charity, but by design. The price of loyalty. Every year, without fail, the United States sends around $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel. That's not a typo. That's more than what most countries receive from the U.S. combined. And while many Americans are debating the cost of healthcare, education, and housing back home, this funding flows quietly like clockwork across the ocean. But why? Why is Israel, a nation the size of New Jersey, the top recipient of U.S. foreign aid? Because in Washington, Israel isn't just an ally, it's an investment, an extension of American power in a region that rarely sees peace. But more than that, it's a political force, one backed by some of the most organized, well-funded lobbying efforts the U.S. has ever seen. Enter AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the country. AIPAC doesn't operate in the shadows. It's not a conspiracy. It's a real public, well-oiled machine that influences policy, drafts resolutions, and mobilizes voters. Their goal? To ensure unwavering U.S. support for Israel, regardless of the administration in power. And they're good at what they do. Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. Presidents change, but the script stays the same because every politician in Washington knows that questioning support for Israel can mean political suicide. Campaign donations disappear. Opposition rises. Reputations get attacked. So even if a leader wants to challenge that $3.8 billion price tag, they rarely do, not because it's right, but because it's risky. And it goes deeper than money. Pro-Israel lobbyists have helped shape actual U.S. foreign policy decisions, from how the U.S. votes at the UN to whether sanctions are placed on Israel's enemies. They influence the narrative, frame the conflicts, and ensure that the U.S. position mirrors Israel's interest, almost word for word. Think about Iran. Every time the U.S. moves closer to diplomacy, closer to peace talks, pressure builds, politicians suddenly speak of security concerns, of protecting our allies. But those phrases are often just polite echoes of AIPAC's talking points. Iran must remain the enemy. Conflict must remain the default. Because peace in this equation disrupts the balance of control. And this isn't happening in secret. It's on paper. It's in speeches. It's in campaign trails. Pro-Israel PACs contribute millions to elections. Candidates compete to prove who's more committed to Israel's security. They pledge support like it's a requirement, not a choice. So when you see the U.S. send weapons, veto UN resolutions, or defend Israeli military actions without question, remember it's not always about moral alignment. It's about political pressure. It's about the strings behind the scenes being pulled by those who know exactly where the power sits. And the most sobering part, most Americans don't even know this is happening. They see alliances. They hear support for democracy. But what they don't see is the network of influence that ensures U.S. loyalty is never questioned, never delayed, and never cut off, even when it should be. This isn't about hate. It's about truth. It's about understanding that behind every dollar, every deal, and every drone strike, there are forces that shape the outcome long before the public hears the speech. And when one nation holds that much sway over another's foreign policy, it's no longer just an alliance, it's control. The shadow war behind the headlines, Iran, just the name alone stirs tension. It's always on the news, nuclear talks, missile tests, sanctions, threats. For decades, the US has painted Iran as one of the biggest threats to global stability. But if we look deeper, we start to see something interesting. The question isn't just, is Iran dangerous? It's also who benefits from that danger. Let's talk about the nuclear program. Iran has long maintained that its nuclear development is for peaceful energy purposes. The US and Israel claim otherwise, pointing to the risk of nuclear weapons falling into the hands of a regime they call extreme and hostile. But here's the twist. This narrative of fear, this urgency to contain Iran, has been just as useful as it's been threatening, because every time Iran is painted as the villain, Israel positions itself as the hero, the regional guardian, the essential ally. And guess who benefits from that framing? Billions in defense funding, military support, diplomatic shields. The moment Iran appears stronger, Israel's leverage with the US gets stronger too. Now let's talk about sanctions. The US has placed crushing sanctions on Iran for years, on oil exports, banking systems, and technology. These sanctions haven't just hurt Iran's economy, they've also isolated it politically, making it harder for Iran to engage with the global community. And every time that isolation deepens, Israel breathes easier. Why? Because a weak cornered Iran is less of a threat to Israeli security, at least on paper. But more than that, the fear of Iran allows Israel to justify bold military actions like airstrikes on Syria or covert operations deep in Iranian territory. It's the perfect excuse. The world nods along while Israel defends itself, and the US provides the cover. But here's where it gets even more strategic. Um, the US doesn't just respond to Iran, it anticipates Iran. Um, it stations troops across the Middle East. It sells billions in weapons to Gulf allies. It pulls out of nuclear deals at Israel's urging. It frames Iran not as a nation to negotiate with, but as a threat to be neutralized. And that narrative doesn't come out of nowhere. It echoes the fears projected by Tel Aviv. This fear has become a tool, a useful one, because as long as Iran is seen as the aggressor, there's no pressure on Israel to change, no pressure to shift its policies or rethink its regional role. The conflict keeps attention away from what's happening in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem. Iran becomes the distraction, and a powerful one. And the media, they play along. Stories of nuclear threats get more clicks than stories about diplomacy. Headlines scream about enriched uranium but whisper about peace efforts. The public never sees the full picture. They see what they're allowed to see. So is Iran a threat? Maybe. But is the fear of Iran being used as a strategic weapon? Absolutely. Because when one country's fear becomes another country's justification, that's not just politics, that's power at work. And while the world watches the tension, the missiles, the speeches, behind it all, someone is pulling the strings carefully, quietly, consistently. A game of power few dare to name. The Middle East isn't just a region, it's a chessboard. Every move, every alliance, every silence holds meaning. And at the center of this intricate game sits a powerful triangle, the United States, Israel, and the larger Middle East. It's a relationship built not just on diplomacy, but on strategy, survival, and profit. Let's start with what lies beneath the soil. Oil, the lifeblood of global economies. The reason why the Middle East has always been a magnet for foreign intervention. Whoever controls the flow of oil controls influence over nations. That's why U.S. military bases are scattered across the region like pins on a map, not for peace, but for power. These bases aren't just about defense, they're about visibility, Presence, control. The U.S. wants to be close to the Strait of Hormuz, where a significant percentage of the world's oil moves. One disruption in that narrow waterway can shake economies worldwide. That's not just military thinking, that's strategic positioning on a global scale. Now enter Israel, not a major oil player, but a military and intelligence powerhouse. Israel provides boots on the ground insight, advanced tech, and real-time intelligence that Washington relies on. It's a vital node in this network. And in return, Israel gets funding, weapons, and diplomatic protection, even when it crosses international lines. Meanwhile, the rest of the region becomes the playing field. Iran, Syria, Lebanon, even Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Each one is either a pawn, a partner, or a threat, depending on the day. And every U.S. decision ripples through this web. When Washington imposes sanctions, sells weapons, or withdraws troops, the entire region shifts in response. But here's the deeper truth. Conflict is profitable. Every airstrike, every escalation, every standoff justifies more defense budgets, more surveillance, more weapon sales. U.S. arms manufacturers thrive, political campaigns get donations, middlemen profit, and the average citizen in Iran, in Gaza, even in America, pays the price. Peace doesn't fuel contracts. Stability doesn't sell missiles. So the triangle thrives on just enough tension to stay powerful, but not enough to implode. It's a balancing act. Chaos without collapse, war without resolution, talks without trust. And while leaders speak of democracy and defense, the real conversations happen behind closed doors, in strategy rooms, in military briefings, in corporate boardrooms. They're not asking how to end the conflict. They're asking how to manage it, how to keep the pieces moving in their favor. Because in this game, not everyone suffers. Some grow richer, some gain more control, some strengthen their grip on the board, and the louder the chaos, the easier it is to hide those silent gains. So next time you see a sudden U.S. strike, a flare-up in Gaza, or an oil price spike, ask yourself who benefits, who profits from instability, who needs the game to never truly end. Because the answers aren't found in headlines. They're found in the patterns, in the quiet agreements, and the unspoken alliances that keep the triangle alive, not for peace, not for people, but for power. The war you're not supposed to see. In today's world, not all wars are fought with bombs or tanks. Some battles never make the news. Some victories happen in silence. And in the shadows of diplomacy and televised conflicts, a quieter, more calculated war is being fought through cyber attacks, covert operations, assassinations, and secret alliances. You won't find it in headlines, but it's shaping the world just the same. Let's talk about cyber warfare, a modern battleground where firewalls replace front lines. Israel has one of the most advanced cyber units in the world, and the United States, the same. Together, they formed a tech-driven partnership that doesn't just monitor threats, it neutralizes them before the public ever hears a word. One of the most infamous examples, Stuxnet, a cyber weapon reportedly developed by U.S. and Israeli intelligence to sabotage Iran's nuclear centrifuges. It worked. No boots on the ground, no explosions on TV, just silent damage, silent success. Then there's intelligence sharing. Behind the public handshakes and press conferences, real decisions are made through classified exchanges. Israel's Mossad and America's CIA communicate more often than most realize. They swap surveillance data, coordinate covert missions, and even plan operations together. These aren't just national defense moves. They're chess pieces, placed with precision. And sometimes, the silence turns deadly. Several Iranian nuclear scientists have been mysteriously assassinated over the years. No warning, no trial, just gone. While no nation has publicly taken responsibility, All signs point to covert operations backed by Israeli intelligence, with likely green lights from Washington. These aren't random acts. These are targeted moves meant to stall Iran's progress without starting an official war. Why the silence? Because the public doesn't need to know, not until after it's done. These operations bypass debate, avoid headlines, and erase accountability. They let nations act with impunity under the veil of security. But the question that rarely gets asked is security for whom? Because every silent operation serves someone's interest, and often that interest isn't peace, it's dominance, control, keeping a perceived enemy just weak enough to never fully rise, but just strong enough to keep funding flowing, tensions high and alliances unshaken. The media, they play their part, sometimes by choice, sometimes by restriction. Sensitive topics get buried, reports get downplayed, narratives get shaped not just by what's said, but by what's left out. Meanwhile, the public consumes a version of reality that's been filtered, softened, and edited while the real moves happen out of sight. Who's authorizing these operations? Who's signing off on cyber sabotage, midnight drone strikes, or black ops missions? It's not just generals and intelligence chiefs. These decisions often trace back to top political leadership, presidents, prime ministers, elite advisors. The very people who speak of peace at the podium are the ones approving silent war behind the curtain. And who benefits? Defense contractors, lobbyists, political players who rise in approval for being tough on threats. The nations who control the silence control the power. And while average citizens live in fear or ignorance, others profit from the illusion of safety they've created. So, while the world watches the noise, remember, real power moves quietly. And in that quiet, there are no questions, no accountability, and often no justice. Just results, calculated, precise, hidden. The currency of chaos. Let's pause for a moment and ask the question. No one seems brave enough to ask. Who actually benefits from all this conflict? From the wars, the threats, the constant fear hanging over the world like a storm cloud? Who gains when peace is postponed, when tension becomes the normal, and when distrust is baked into every policy? Because, let's be honest, peace doesn't pay the same. Fear, however, fear is a gold mine. Fear funds weapons. Fear justifies surveillance. Fear keeps people silent, and fear keeps money moving. Every time a new threat is announced, budgets grow. Every time tensions rise in the Middle East, arms deals are signed. Every time war seems inevitable, someone somewhere gets a contract, a green light, a check. But if peace were truly profitable, we would already have it. The technology exists, the intelligence exists, the leaders exist. But what's missing is incentive, because peace slows the machine. Peace doesn't generate headlines. Peace doesn't sell missiles or fund campaigns. It doesn't justify billion-dollar alliances or endless military spending. Ask yourself, how many leaders have risen to power by promising peace, and how many have stayed in power by delivering war? We say we want calm, but the system is built to run on chaos. The longer the fear lasts, the more influence those in control keep. Look around, the same narratives keep getting recycled. They're building nukes. They're threatening democracy. We must strike first. And every time the public reacts, not because they've thought it through, but because fear is louder than logic. But who's writing these scripts? Who's shaping what you see, what you fear, and what you believe? It's not just the media. It's not just politicians. It's a web of influence. From lobbyists to defense industries, from intelligence agencies to foreign governments, each playing their part to keep the wheels turning. And in the middle of it all, everyday people are left misinformed, divided, and distracted, fighting over headlines, blind to the strings being pulled above them. It's no accident. It's design. Controlled chaos presented as national security. So the next time someone tells you war is necessary, Ask necessary for whom, who's getting protected, and who's getting played. Because real truth doesn't need noise. It doesn't need fear. It speaks in stillness. But here's the thing. Truth is often uncomfortable. It breaks narratives. It makes people shift in their seats. It challenges loyalties, traditions, and even faith. But if the truth you hear never unsettles you, maybe it isn't truth at all. Maybe it's comfort. Maybe it's control. And if what you've heard today stings, if it sits heavy in your chest, good. That's the weight of awareness. That's the signal you're waking up. And once you do, there's no going back. Because the real battlefield isn't just in the deserts of the Middle East, it's in the minds of the masses. And the only way to win there is with truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Does it shock you how deep this really goes? How what we thought were simple headlines or foreign policy decisions are actually pieces of a much larger game? If your chest feels heavy, if your thoughts are spinning, that's not confusion. That's clarity beginning to rise, and you're not alone. There are thousands out there waking up to the truth, questioning everything they were told was normal. So, drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't hold back. Someone out there needs to read your words, to feel less crazy, to realize they're not the only one paying attention. You see, most people are still living on the surface, headlines, sound bites, and recycled outrage. But here, we go deeper. We pull back the curtain. We talk about what they won't touch on the evening news. Because this space was never built for comfort. It was built for clarity, for courage, for those who feel something's off and are done pretending it's fine. And if that's you, if you're tired of the silence, tired of the manipulation, and ready to see through the noise, hit that subscribe button. Join a community that isn't afraid to dig, to speak, to connect the dots. Because the world doesn't change when we stay quiet. It changes when enough of us open our eyes and refuse to look away. You're not here by accident. You were meant to hear this. So speak, share, subscribe. The truth is loudest when it comes from the people who were never supposed to find it.